Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at MikeMalatesta.com. Rob, hey, welcome back to the show. I'm so happy to be doing this, what I call part 2 with you today. It was we had a great discussion on our previous podcast about all kinds of things food related, but we didn't get to a ton of stuff that I wanted to and Rob wanted to, and so we decided to do this number 2, and we're going to focus on a couple of things in this number 2. First is sustainability. We talked about, Rob talked about how do you feed 9 billion people in the first episode, and how do you grow 10,000 years worth of food in the next 30 years, and some of the things I remember from it. But we didn't get into the nuts and bolts about it. So we're going to talk about that today, and we're also going to talk about convergence, the convergence of technology, and how that convergence is reshaping, reforming, and maybe even disrupting, to use a common word, how food is grown and how we're going to support all the mouths that we have to support in the world. So, Rob, let's get started with sustainability.
Yeah, well, on October the 15th of 2020, I had an opportunity, Mike, to address the United Nations and the FAO at the World Committee on Global Food Security. It was a 3-day conference out of Rome, and got a chance to talk. And I think on the last episode, I mentioned the issues around food waste, which in my mind, the number one cause is aflatoxin, or mycotoxins rather. And mycotoxins are a fungus that attacks the crop in the field and also in storage. So it's the number one food waster in the world and the number one cause of liver cancer in the world. So I talked about that. I talked a little bit about food nutrition, or the density of food. For example, if you wanted to have more zinc in your diet, there's no ideology or philosophy to do that. That has to come with science and output-based type of applications. In other words, you have to put zinc onto the soil or onto the crop to make it happen. But what I want to talk about today, Mike, is more about where is the world going. You and I both belong to Abundance 360 with Peter Diamandis. And I don't know if you caught it, but in the last 2 weeks or so, he sat down with Elon Musk.
I did.
And they launched a $100 million carbon challenge. And so maybe we'll start there. For every percent of organic matter, and organic matter is broken down plant matter. So when a farmer harvests a crop, like behind me on the screen here, when a farmer harvests a crop, the crop residue, some people call it trash or stover or residue, from the corn crop or the wheat crop or the canola crop or whatever crop, sits on the soil surface, and eventually that breaks down through microbial degradation and turns into something called organic matter, ultimately humus. Now, here's some rough cowboy math. For every 6-inch slice of soil on the planet Earth, if you could increase your soil organic matter by 1%, you would pull out of the atmosphere 12,000 pounds of carbon, give or take, approximately 20 metric tons of carbon dioxide per acre. So just think about that. For every 1% organic matter increase per acre, you pull 20 metric tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
And why is that, Rob?
Multiply that by the number, hundreds of millions of acres of farmland, and agriculture all of a sudden goes from, an emitter of greenhouse gases to one of the world's biggest solutions for sequestration of greenhouse gases. And in Peter's interview with Elon, Peter asked Elon about a trillion trees, and Elon's pragmatic answer was, well, I'm not against trees, but where are you going to put a trillion trees? Right. Because you have to think about water, you have to think about some sort of fertility, you have to be able to plant these. Where are you going to plant them? So anyways, I'd like to start off with that kind of an idea, Mike.
Okay, so let's get into why what you just said about increasing organic matter an inch greatly impacts the amount of carbon that can be absorbed. What is actually happening, Rob? Like how is the carbon being absorbed?
Okay, so the way it works is carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide is pulled into the plants through a process called photosynthesis,
Okay.
and through the sunlight's energy, we convert that carbon dioxide into sugar, starches, cellulose, hemicellulose, etc. That becomes plant matter. Um, we eat, or animals eat, that plant matter, and the remainder of the plant, the part that isn't shipped away, is in fact left on the ground. And if you don't degrade the soil, and what I mean by that, if you don't till the soil, then you actually can increase organic matter in the soil. This is very healthy. So when we're talking about sustainability, I'm not one who believes sustainability comes with a label. Sustainability does not come with a label. Sustainability comes with an outcome. In other words, and I think I said this last time, if you had $100,000 in your bank account and you could live off the interest, I think that's sustainable. If you have 4% organic matter in your soil and you agronomically manage that soil so that at the end of 20 years you have 4% organic matter or more, that's sustainability, because you haven't tapped the the principle of the soil. So when you this morning I read a 30,000 acre organic farm in South Dakota, and the soil is being degraded at a very rapid rate. Okay, organic's got to be good, right? Well, how do you control weeds in an organic farm? You till. Every time you touch the soil with tillage equipment, you destroy the soil structure and you release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So it's not always so cut and dried that a label, organic, regenerative, ecological, whatever it is, ties itself to long-term sustainability. That, my friend, is tied back to outcome-based measurements.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So say you don't till the soil, how do you replant on it?
Well, one of the real big movements, especially in Western Canada, and especially in a place like Argentina, has been no-till. So what it means is if you think of your image of a farming operation as somebody sitting on a red fendered tractor outside with dusty old overalls and plowing the land. We don't touch the land anymore. We seed directly into the previous year's stubble. So when a crop of wheat comes off, we go in the springtime with what's called a one-pass direct seed, and we cut the next year's canola crop straight into the previous wheat crop stubble. It's been an advancement that's been accelerating for the past 30 years in agriculture. And now the media is waking up to the fact that, wait a minute, if you till land, that's bad. Well, shit, we've known that for 30 years. And so the world is kind of waking up. They're trying to put a label on it saying that if you don't till the land and you regenerate the soil, well, if you have good agronomics, we've been doing that for a long time, decades.
So, okay, so interestingly, I'm in Wisconsin. You're in Canada. We grow a lot of corn here. We grow a lot of soybeans. We grow, I don't know everything, but we grow a lot of stuff. But I still see. This time of the year, especially, I'm seeing farms, being tilled all day long.
Yep. That's something that's got to change. I mean, the transition to a no tillage type of operation, there is a bit of a pain point there as you go and you start to really not disturb your soils. There's a whole bunch of nuances here because Wisconsin can get pretty wet sometimes. And so if you practice no tillage, your soils might actually become wetter. And then farmers can implement a strategy called strip tillage, ridge till. There's all of these nuances that happen almost county by county, Mike, that result in sustainable agriculture. But by and large, we are still seeing too much tillage in the agricultural sector. That's a blanket statement, But whether it's the United States or whether it's Europe, who's really does a lot of tilling, and yet they pound the drum about sustainability, or whether it's Africa, where small landholders hire one-way diskers to prepare gardens, there's still too much tillage in the world.
Okay, so let's get back to the organic farm that you mentioned, where the soil quality was degrading, um, and because of the need to till, because of the need to prevent weeds, and it kind of just goes on and on and on. How, I guess, what happens when the soil degrades, right? The quality degrades. You've got to add more fertilizer to get it back, or you have to let it sit. What do you actually? What's the consequence?
Well, once the soil has been degraded to the extent that this article has indicated, so you have a soil in a fragile ecosystem, so a semi-arid plains type of prairie type of environment, and you've been growing crops on that land, and then you till the crap out of the soil to to manage weeds and try to get your seed bed prepared, etc. That damage could take decades and decades to repair. And it won't be repaired under an organic regime, because under organic regime you'd have to we'd have to have an external source of nitrogen. So I suppose the combination of livestock on that land over the long term and really careful management will help to resurrect that soil, to reconstruct the damage that's been done. But it takes decades. It's like a reputation, Mike. You can work your whole life to build your reputation, and then one tweet can destroy it. It's like that with soil. Okay. You can work a lifetime to increase the value of soil, but in a couple of years of heavy tillage, you can destroy it. And people don't think about that.
And so that's interesting, because the way you described it, if I got it right, was you bring animals onto the land and their excrement actually adds the nitrogen back in, which is the source of methane, and then you get into all these other.
Well, I mean, again, there's a little bit of it, because to grow the crop that the livestock would eat, to grow the grass that the cows would eat, you have to have nitrogen, and so it's. Unless we have legume fixing crops like an alfalfa crop, but they're only at the most 55% and efficient. So this isn't an easy fix. Without an external source of nitrogen, such as the nitrogen that comes from nitrogen fertilizer, half the planet's population would not be sustained. So this is a big deal. And when Peter Diamandis was talking to Elon, the question that I shot in for Elon was, what are you going to do for an external source of nitrogen on Mars? Because that is, in my mind, the Achilles heel. That's what I've been thinking about. Yeah.
It was interesting in that how, and by the way, for those of you who don't know, so there's this thing called an X Prize, and every year, or maybe multiple times a year, I don't even know, there's a prize that's established to help encourage people to solve a difficult problem. And the most recent X Prize is $100 million that Elon Musk is funding to help figure out, to encourage technology development to figure out a way to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And in the case of this prize, you have to demonstrate, if I remember correctly, you have to demonstrate a technology that you could scale or build up so that it would remove a gigaton, which is like 1 million tons, I don't know, it's a big number, of carbon annually or something like that. So that's what the X Prize, that's what this year's X Prize is about. And as Rob was talking, Peter Diamandis was interviewing Elon about the X Prize, although it went out into all different things, because of course SpaceX was launching the next morning and all this other cool stuff. But the tree thing really got me, because I've heard Mark Benioff and some others talk about, I think that was at the A362, talk about planting trees. And it seems like such a simple way to fix this, right? Because trees are basically what you described in the stalks and the organic matter that's left, right? They're basically emitting oxygen. They're taking in carbon, or carbon dioxide, I guess. But I never thought about, I mean, I obviously thought about the space, but I guess I really didn't think about the water, Rob.
Well, the water or the fertility. I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
trees can't grow with zero fertility. I mean, they can grow with less, but they can't grow with none. So you can't put them on absolutely eroded soils. And if you do, you also have to consider the water factor, and then space. Where are you going to put these? Where are you going to put these trees? A trillion trees takes up a lot of room. So
Yeah.
where are you going to put that? I suppose if our agriculture production rose, Mike, if we were able to produce more on a given acre, then we could set aside some of the marginal land and plant them into trees. And I believe that agriculture is going to be one of the contenders for the X Prize for carbon removal. Here's my idea. My idea would be to genetically engineer a crop that would do two things. One is fix its own nitrogen. So you have a dramatic reduction in nitrous oxide because you're not using nitrogenous fertilizers. So have a crop that fixes its own nitrogen, so we don't need to use fertilizer, and genetically engineer it so it has massive root proliferation, giving it greater saline resistance and greater ability to harvest nutrients out of the soil and go deeper to get water that's in the soil. So if I could win the X Prize by breeding a crop that would be nitrogen fixing, greater root mass, scavenge nutrients out of the soil, and it would get better water utilization, increasing the water use efficiency and greater productivity. And I would win the X Prize with that crop. That's how I would do it, because that crop, that genetically engineered crop planted on hundreds of millions of acres would win the prize. It would do it because it does it faster than trees could do it. And I would win. That's what I want to do. So the future of farming, I said it in the last podcast, I believe is GMO, genetically modified organic farming. We don't want to use outside inputs to grow a crop, but to get the plants to do what we want them to do in an accelerated fashion requires modern science, genetic engineering.
And with your X Prize idea, Rob, what would the crop be that you would target, or would this be universal?
Well, this is another thing. If you were to measure agriculture productivity on the planet Earth, how would you do it? If I was to say, Mike, your job is to develop a metric, to develop a measurement to baseline agriculture productivity by crop, by region around the world, how would you do it? And I think I would do it by measuring gigajoules produced off an acre of land, because Canada can't grow sugarcane, but Brazil can grow sugarcane. But Canada can grow oil seeds. So oil seeds like canola is high in oil. That means high in energy from that crop. Iowa and Illinois, people say, oh, monoculture. Iowa, why are the three I's grow? It's corn and soybean all the time. Well, it's because they can. And they do it better than anybody else in the world. Why would they grow a barley crop on land that can grow 250 to 300 bushels of corn? Why would you do that? I mean, this is what that land can do very, very well. So if I was to, do that breeding, it would have to be in several crops. It would have to be in wheat. It would have to be in corn. It would have to be in a crop like maybe sorghum. Something that would grow, and then maybe you could do an accelerated grass crop that would allow you to run more livestock per acre than you ever have before. That would be kind of cool. So those kind of things go through my head.
What's a gigajoule? You mentioned that. I don't know what that is.
It's a measurement of energy. I don't have the definition in my head, but it's a measurement of energy. So you could, if you could measure gigajoules of production, you would take in sunlight energy plus water plus the nutrients from the soil, and you would measure the output of the crop in terms of gigajoules. I think that's an interesting idea to think about. I've often wondered how would you baseline agriculture productivity on the planet?
Huh. Would that include calories as well, or no? Would that not be?
Yeah, it can be converted into calories. Yeah.
Okay.
But we grow crops for different reasons, right? So some are grown for oil, some are grown for starch content, some are grown for protein. So you have to find some common denominator. I don't know if I'm right on this or not, but I've done a lot of thinking about it. I think this is the first time I've actually publicly talked about it.
Well, well, thank you for that, by the way. It's kind of interesting because you're not looking at the problem as if, okay, I'm going to create some brand new, suction machine that's going to somehow be deployed and be able to suck carbon out, and I don't even know where to put it or destroy it. I'm not even sure. You're basically saying we already have a mechanism. So how can I accelerate the mechanism?
Yeah.
Am I
So
right?
we farm in Canada, and the winters are dark. I mean, there's very little sunlight in Canada in the wintertime, but in the summertime, as the Earth rotates, our day length is pretty long. If you go north of Edmonton, Alberta to Peace River country, you could read a newspaper on the step at 11:30 at night. So the amount of sunlight that can be captured, even in northern latitudes, but you have to grow that crop in 90 to 100 days. You don't have the luxury of growing that crop over 180 days. It just doesn't work. So to me, those farmers are extremely efficient. So if you're measuring efficiency based on the conversion of that sunlight energy into a crop with that amount of time, I think we do pretty good. Again, people, Hollywood likes to vilify North American agriculture as somehow being unsustainable or sinister or something. Shit, there's lots of families, Mike, that have been farming the same land for 200 years or more. Show me a business that's been around 200 years. I'll show you a sustainable business. So agriculture, yeah, we learn, we unlearn, we relearn. We're always learning, and we're always applying science. So without convergence, without even going into the new technology and just farmers applying the stuff that we have today at a higher level, like precision agriculture, et cetera, we can continue to increase food production. I'm convinced of that. It takes a while to disseminate those new practices down to farm level at all areas. But this dissemination with the likes of the product that I'm building, the technology AGvisorPRO, which connects agriculture to its experts in real time, this creates an acceleration of the adoption of new technology.
So let me go a little bit further on this. When people talk about using land or for carbon sequestration, that's different than being carbon neutral, like not tilling the soil, right? That's what is that? What is it? I don't think many people know what that actually means, Rob. What does it mean to you?
Well, again, it's not rocket science, it's soil science. When you grow a crop and you don't till the land, eventually, if you manage that soil carefully, organic matter and humus in the soil will rise. And as that soil organic matter rises, you have effectively sequestered or pulled carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and made the soil healthier and made it hold water better. So all of those things line up very pragmatically. It's a good thing. Could we accelerate that? Is there ways to accelerate that? Yes, through the judicious use of fertilizer. And I didn't mean stop using fertilizer. I meant using fertilizer the right way, the right kind of fertilizer, the right placement, the right timing. We could accelerate crop growth, and we could also minimize the amount of fertilizer that's lost to the atmosphere or to the environment. Another thing is stop tilling. Don't till the land. If we are tilling the land, then we're fracturing the soil, and that results in degradation and release of greenhouse gases. So all of those things tied together, and then technology that allows us to put the right amount of input, Mike, at the right time, at the right spot on the field is amazing. And that is all referred to as precision agriculture. And we played a big role in bringing precision agriculture. And precision agriculture is the precise placement of inputs on the crop. And that's all underpinned by something called VR, which is variable rate. So you can put on variable rate fertilizer, you can put on variable rate seed, you can put on variable rate fungicide, herbicide, variable rate irrigation. So all of these technologies are coming together so that we can actually have a 120-foot sprayer going across a field and putting on anything from 0 rate of fungicide to the recommended rate on the crop to protect it against disease in real time as that sprayer is traveling at 14 miles an hour across the field. This is all we're doing this now today.
Okay. Well, I want to get more into that because that's part of our technology discussion. But one more question on, you mentioned nitrous oxide, and I'm assuming, and I'm no chemist or know anything, but I'm assuming what you meant is that when you put nitrogen on the field, a byproduct of that is nitrous oxide gas, which gets released and contributes to carbon in the atmosphere. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. So there's two losses. I mean, so just hear me very clearly. Nitrogen is expensive, fertilizer expensive. So why would a farmer waste his nitrogen dollars? It doesn't make any sense. However, there are a number of practices that are better, and there are a number of practices that are worse for the utilization of nitrogen. Spreading out your nitrogen application throughout the growing season, spoon feeding it, is a better practice. Putting nitrogen stabilizers so that the nitrous oxide is reduced, urease inhibitors to reduce the conversion of urea to nitrogen or to nitrous NO3, nitrate. So if we can reduce the amount of nitrate leaching into the groundwater and the amount of nitrous oxide going into the atmosphere, that's a good thing for farmers, and it's a good thing for the planet. And we're working on that. I mean, I can give you lots of examples of ways that we're doing that much better than we did at the beginning of my career.
Okay. And one more, and excuse the pun, in the weeds question about wet fields. Like you mentioned, a lot of Wisconsin farms and maybe other places can be wet. That too can be improved and managed with like strategic drain tile installation. A friend of mine was the owner of they make this huge drain tile, and that's what they would do. They would put it in farm fields so that you wouldn't have these, lakes that would develop after heavy rains and that kind of thing.
Yeah, tile drainage is done based on contour topography mapping of a field, and then you install tile. You install that deep into the soil so that these perforated pipes actually take the excess water off the field. So that's a really good practice for making sure fields don't become saturated. It also requires careful agronomic management, because if you put on too much nitrogen, the nitrate, NO3, is mobile in the soil. It'll leach down with the water and get into those tiles and then move into the water body. So managing nitrogen is really important. Conversely, not doing anything is also very damaging, because flooded fields go through something called denitrification, where very rapidly the nitrogen in the soil is denitrified and blasts off into the atmosphere under anaerobic conditions into the atmospheres and as nitrous oxide. So when I laugh when people in social media have these simple solutions that all farmers should adopt, because farmers are somehow ignorant of the science that it would save the planet. Well, anything but. Farmers are extremely knowledgeable, and it's a deeply detailed and integrated domain that we work in agriculture.
So one more thing on the sustainability, and we'll talk for cattle, animal farms, and the waste from cows and pigs, it gets a really bad rap. There are different technologies for managing it, but I'm curious about your take on digesters, on anaerobic digesters for managing manure and other types of waste on the farm. The reason I ask, well, two reasons. One, I just, after I talked with you, I had an opportunity to talk to a local farm, 3,000 acre, 3,400 cattle, with an integrated cheese manufacturing facility in it. It was like really cool to talk about all that stuff, but they had have multiple anaerobic digesters on their property to essentially improve their carbon footprint and improve their sustainability. And yet, even though it's widely known in farm communities and the farm industry, most people, all they see on in the newspaper or social media is how cows are destroying the the atmosphere with the methane and stuff. So I thought I'd ask you about that as well as our final sort of sustainability angle.
Well, first of all, we could get into real discussion about old carbon versus new carbon.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We touched on that. Fossil fuels being burnt in the atmosphere is new carbon, whereas cows just recycle old carbon. So that's the first thing. The only way you can have cows generate more greenhouse gases if you have more cows. The trapping of gases from manure is in these digesters is really interesting because you can convert that trapped those gases into and turn them into methane. And if you turn them into methane, which is CH4, then you can grab that methane and you can use it. You can use it to heat operations. It's a natural gas, so it's beautiful to use. And when you burn methane, actually, it drops the greenhouse gassing effect. So rather than releasing the methane straight into the atmosphere, we trap the methane or convert the gases into methane and then use them in the existing farming operation. So this effectively is a circle that reduces the farm's pull on the grid, because if you can generate electricity with the methane for the dairy operation, then that's all really good. And then the final piece of the puzzle that nobody thinks about is everybody thinks organic farming is just wonderful. But don't forget that most organic farms depend on manure from livestock operations. So before you crap all over the cows, remember that your organic tomato or whatever you're eating has probably been fertilized by manure from livestock operations.
Needs the cow.
So they're all integrated. You can't, you eliminate the livestock, you eliminate the source of the manure. Where does the organic farms get their manure from? Nobody thinks about that. But again, science implemented at farm level to do things like trapping of the gases from manure make total sense. And then at the end of the day, you have you have an energy source, you have reduction of greenhouse gases, and at the end of the day, you still have a fertilizer that can be used.
Okay, so I said that was the final, but I have one more now that you brought it up again, the old carbon versus new carbon. Explain how a cow does not create any carbon.
All right, so you have to understand half-life. So CH4, methane, has a half-life in the atmosphere of 10 years. That means after 10 years, half is broken down, whereas carbon dioxide has a half-life in the atmosphere of 100 years. So the way this works with a cow is this. Plants utilize photosynthesis, we talked about that, to produce grass. The grass is cellulose and hemicellulose. It has carbon in the grass from the carbon dioxide from the air. Where did the carbon dioxide come from for the grass? It came from the air. The cow eats the grass. The cow burps out CH4, which has a higher greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide. However, it's got a half-life of 10 years and it converts back into what? CO2. So did the cow make more CO2? The answer is no. The cow did not make any more CO2. The only way that you can have more greenhouse gases generated from cattle is if you have more cattle. And the peak of the North American cattle herd was 1971. So we're doing more with science to have more milk produced, more beef produced more efficiently. And again, this is old carbon. So when you talk about the vilification of livestock, it's a cycle, and they're cycling old carbon. But when you burn, gasoline or diesel in your vehicle, you're releasing new carbon. This carbon has been trapped in the earth for billions of years, and now you're releasing that carbon in the atmosphere. That's a new source of carbon. Whereas cattle recycle carbon that was in the atmosphere anyways, because it went into carbon dioxide into the plant. The cow ate the plant, it burps out the CH4. It's a cycle. It's not new carbon, it's old carbon.
Got it. Okay. So yeah. All right. That's very helpful. So your car is not absorbing any carbon. It's not,
No.
It's not recycling any, it's just emitting, and it's emitting carbon that's always been here. It's just been trapped underground in shale formations or whatever. And now it's once it's processed and burned, it's in the atmosphere, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I'm learning a ton here. So let's go to technology, and I'll start with this. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I got pitched on an investment, Rob, and the investment was a piece of farm equipment that would, and I'll probably not have it perfectly right here, but it would plant, it would weed, selectively weed, it would fertilize, and it would also harvest. I think those were the 4 things that it did. And it was one.
You have to have spraying in there somewhere.
Oh, spraying. Yeah. Thank you. And it was one machine. And it was a startup, didn't have an actual machine. They had an idea for a machine, and the folks were, from the equipment space, so they knew what they were talking about. And they had this video, and it was so cool how how it would show it planting, and then it would detect through cameras and sensors. It would detect weeds, and it would, rather than spraying for weeds all over, it would just spray the weed and pick the weed. Actually, I think it might have picked the weed too. It was doing a lot of things, and I just couldn't. I thought it was so cool, but I couldn't figure. To me, it was, if it actually worked, it was so disruptive that I thought that the big farm equipment manufacturers would buy it and kill it, because instead of the farmer, needing 4 pieces of equipment from them, they would only need 1. And I thought there's a lot of inertia, maybe against that. But with that sort of backdrop, and knowing how how much you love technology, and how I know it will impact the future, was that idea crazy? And where are we? Where do you see us? Where are we now? Where do you see us going? Maybe where we've come too.
Yeah, well, as a backdrop to this whole thing, you would ask the question, why robots in agriculture? And the number one reason for robots in agriculture is labor. You simply can't find people to work on the farm, and this is why foreign workers are so important for agriculture, because you can't find North Americans to actually go in the field and pick cucumbers. So you have to have labor. And so labor shortage is critical on many farming operations. So it's not a question of if robots come, it's just a question of when. The second piece of the equation is CapEx. So a combine today is north of $1 million. Big tractors north of $1 million. Sprayers are $750,000. So robots actually, because they work 24/7, or they can work longer hours without people, you can reduce the CapEx cost. And then that does something else. It reduces the operational cost, because you can have many small robots in a field operating at lower cost maybe. And the last piece is sustainability. You could actually decrease the amount of soil compaction by having lighter pieces of equipment on the land. I served as CEO of a robotics company in agriculture from January of 19 to March of 2020. DOT is a robotics platform. It was a U-shaped platform, Mike. It was named after Norbert Bugeaud, who's the inventor. His mother, Dorothy, and she had 9 kids, so she was a multitasker. And DOT was a U-shaped platform that hooked into a seeder, hooked into a sprayer, hooked into a fertilizer spreader. So it was one platform, but you didn't have to put an engine on your seeder or your sprayer or your fertilizer spreader, because DOT was the autonomous robotics platform. That piece of equipment has since been acquired by a company called Raven out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And Raven is investing a lot of money in the advancement of autonomous technology. This is an area classic where convergence slams together, because you can't have robotics in the field or in the greenhouse unless you have very accurate sensory devices. So those sensor devices need to be GPS. So you have to have, if you're in the field, you have to have a robot that operates at 8 or 12 miles an hour. And that robot has to be able to operate with sub-inch accuracy. So GPS is really important. You also have to have sensory devices. So radar, LiDAR, photometrics all have to be integrated, because safety is a primary concern. These pieces of equipment are big, and you have to make sure that animals and human beings are protected. Then you have to have algorithms. So as we have a piece of equipment in the field, you have to be able to do path planning. You have to also be able to make sure that you can do the things that you want with the inputs that are being applied. So I shared with you earlier the thought of variable rate seed or variable rate fertilizer or sprays. Now, the one thing that's different from what you said that that I've experienced so far is that for harvest operation, like a platform like DOT, or I think it may be called RAP now, Raven Autonomy Platform, but those kind of platforms may be adapted for seeding. The seed width was 30 feet because you have draft. The sprayer was 120 foot, and then the spreader could spread out about 80 to 90 feet. So you have to consider draft and horsepower requirements for harvesting itself, Mike. That idea that you presented wouldn't work because, quite frankly, the horsepower required to harvest wheat or corn or these crops is very large. These equipment, this combines, typically have north of 500-600 horsepower inside of them. So, but we are using swath guidance or auto steer inside of combines, and all sorts of algorithms run the harvesting operation today. You may have a man inside, but that operator, man or woman inside the combine, basically is monitoring what the combine is set out to do with the algorithms and the computers. Inside of greenhouses, awesome. There's just so many operations that can be autonomized. AGvisorPRO, our platform, has a partner called Ecoation out of Canada, and they're basically providing autonomy inside of greenhouses with robots. And then we're playing with Dr. Harry Klur on a thing called Beyond Imagination, which is an avatar that we could train using human beings, and eventually the AI would get built with the avatar so that the avatar would learn how to pick tomatoes. So these things are all happening. And then you tie them with sensing technology like remote sensing. And we could make a lot better use of the resources to grow crops than we are today when robots start taking a chunk of the work in the field.
How do you teach an avatar how to pick tomatoes?
Well, you have to look at Beyond Imagination. So that is a collaboration that was started at Abundance 360. But Ray Kurzweil, Dean Kamen, ourselves, Harry Klur, we're all playing in this arena where you could be anywhere, occupying a haptic suit and Oculus lenses, and then you would wake up inside of a robot. Her name is Beyond Me. And she was really, the robot was recently profiled at a Tony Robbins event. So Harry Klur just launched Beyond Imagination there. But any operation, whether you're a dentist or you're a agricultural worker or you're a rescue operator, could be done with robotics, where you don't put a human being in danger or in the hardworking area. The human being basically runs it with a haptic suit. So that's pretty far out there. But when you think about agriculture, it makes sense for agriculture. And there's so many things converging in agriculture that I just get excited every morning when I wake up.
Well, okay, you blew my mind with that one. So, okay. But I can see that now, having done the especially this year after we did, kind of a deep dive on VR, I was exposed to so many things that I never would have thought of or thought possible. So, okay, I like that. So you're going to get the X Prize and you're going to develop this thing too. That's great. So let's talk about technology in places where right now there may be none or very little, but where the demand for food is very high. Like, I know you're working in Uganda, maybe some other places in Africa. We talked about food spoilage, right? You can only move food so far. If you don't harvest it properly, you can grow it and it all dies right there. You've got the mycotoxin issue. How do you see, I can see in the US how, and maybe as the first world countries, how this future could be pretty close. But how about the areas where the demand is very high and the resources are very low?
Well, this is interesting. Yesterday, I was talking to a company that was backed by Mitsubishi. It was backed by Mitsubishi, and it was in it was in working in Africa. It was an electrification company, Mike. And what they would do is they would bring a solar energy and batteries, and they would electrify households. And 90% of the households are rural, because if you live in Africa and you live in Nairobi or you live in Kampala, you have electricity, but it's the rural area that doesn't have electricity. You want to increase, if you want to increase, standard of living, give people electricity so their kids can read at night. Birth rates go down, education goes up, money goes up. They just need access to, they have the ability to charge their cellular phones. And so electricity is very important. Most of the electrification done by this company is farmers. And so we began to think about how to utilize a technology like AGvisorPRO to create instantaneous connectivity. My argument has always been, Mike, that the pinch point for greater sustainability of agriculture is the right advice from the right expert at the right time. And many of these countries, Uganda, Kenya, have great experts. They just don't have enough money for gas or enough time to get to all these farmers. So how do you scale that? How do you scale that? And so I believe that, access to the right information from the right people can help farmers make better buying decisions. The number one problem in many small landholder areas in the developed or in emerging nations is seed fraud. So the package of seed looks really good, and I'm telling you, Mr. Farmer, that this seed is going to be great. So you have saved up your money and you buy the seed. The seed is all disease infected and it's not what you promised, but the package looked good. So we've got to root out some of those bad behaviors. Also, change in practice is hard. Keep in mind, Mike, that if you were a subsistence farmer and I come along with a new idea, you risk everything. You risk everything. Your children, you risk the ability to feed your children if my idea doesn't work. So the risk level is very high for small landholders. So information dissemination, and then tools such as crop insurance would go a long way, and credit, helping the farmers get the credit they need to buy the inputs that they need, to buy the seed, to buy the fertilizer, to buy the crop protection. There's if you got infestation of fungus and mycotoxin, aflatoxin coming on the crop, you've got to get out there and do some preventative fungicide spraying. Otherwise, you lose your crop, or you eat that damaged crop, and then that causes abortion in your animals, and it causes liver cancer in you. So you got a few choices here, and technology can help speed that up. The other thing that's interesting, Mike, is remote sensing. I mean, using algorithms right now, we should be able to fly satellites over great chunks of the emerging world and determine the crop density and what kind of crops are growing and how this mix is happening, and give us greater metadata as well as microdata. If I could do one thing for farmers worldwide, it would be to give every farmer a soil test. So, if a farmer in an emerging area had access to a soil test, you would know what your pH was. You would know what your organic matter. You would know the cation exchange capacity. You would know these things. And instead of putting on a fertilizer that doesn't match your crop or your soil needs, you would have a much better match of nutrition and the fertilizer you're putting on to the crop you're growing. So this is something I'd like to see, is massive analytical data. Soil testing is wet chemistry is pretty old technology, but there's all kinds of sensor spectroscopy technology that's emerging right now that could change the way we get information on soil nutrients in real time.
And do you see a way where these satellites that you're talking about could, with enough machine learning and enough recognition, be able to tell you what the soil quality is? or is it too fine of a?
Yesterday, I was talking to a company that was saying that they had sensors that could go onto an irrigation pivot, and they could determine the soil moisture as the pivot. If you're flying across many areas of the United States, you'll see round circles on the ground. Many people don't know what they are. That's pivot irrigation. So you have a center stand, and this long this long irrigation pipe goes out basically on wheels and turns around and irrigates the crop. Well, not all parts of the field need the same amount of water. It depends on evapotranspiration rate, transpiration rate. It depends on the soil texture. So if we were able to know what the soil moisture is ahead of the nozzle hitting that area, we could variable rate irrigate. So I was talking to a company yesterday that says they've been ground truthing basically penetration technology that can go ahead and tell you how much soil moisture there is, and then adjust the drop nozzles in real time to change the amount of water. That's amazing. From the sky, I don't know yet. I mean, there's people working with gamma rays. There's people working with microwaves, trying to determine things like carbon sequestration in soils. I'm not sure where we're going to be at with that, but we can use satellites and aerial imagery. I sit on the board with a company called IntelliNair, and actually that company too was born at Abundance 360 because Al, who's the CEO of IntelliNair, sat down with myself and Peter Lacey at Abundance, and he was thinking about growing this company. And IntelliNair is an algorithm company. They're an analytics company using aerial imagery and satellite imagery to provide anomaly detection in crop in real time through the growing season. So that's an amazing technology. And it can be used in so many different areas of ag, including small landholder farms, which we could tell what kind of crops are growing and how effectively they're growing using the algorithms.
So as you sit here now, Rob, you look out, say the next 10 years, what are the 3, 4, 5, I don't know, what are the things you see from a technology standpoint or convergence of technology standpoint that are going to have the most significant impact on our ability to produce more food better, maybe GMOF, increase that, better, faster, less expensively, on less land, whatever?
Well, that's a great question. As I've been thinking while you've been asking it, I would say that, in my opinion, and without doubt, the number one thing that would impact the planet's ability to grow food, nutritionally dense food, sustainably, to create infinite sustainability of agriculture, without doubt, the number one technology would be biotech. So the ability to use RNAi interference technology or messenger RNA technology, like is in your Pfizer or Moderna shots you're taking for COVID right now.
Right.
I don't know how you can line up for a shot for COVID and then vilify that same technology's use in agriculture. It doesn't make any sense. So the number one thing that I think would change or that would accelerate and ensure we're infinitely sustainable in food production is biotechnology. However, that comes with heavy geopoliticals and politics. So the next thing I think is an area that I'm working on, and I think it's basically information dissemination. It's basically getting information in a timely manner to the people who need it. So I just did some demographics, and in the United States of America, 20% of your farmers are under 44 years old. They farm less than 1,000 acres, and they've been farming less than 9 years. So if we can get information quicker to these people, these screenagers are going to adopt the technology faster than their parents or grandparents did. So I think information technology is going to be a big deal. I think indoor farming, indoor farming is going to be and continue to grow at a rapid pace. And I have no qualms with that. If we can produce high water containing, and this is the key, if we can produce high water containing produce, cucumbers, tomatoes, lettuce, closer to the point of consumption by using indoor farming techniques, and that's great. A couple of Achilles heels is we still haven't seen one that's made money. And the other thing is a lot of them tout, we won't use any pesticides, we're going to be organic, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's all fine until white mold gets into your HVAC system, and then you're screwed. So it's, again, you got to have a way to fight Mother Nature. You think Mother Nature is, flowing hair in a beautiful dress, dancing through the field. When you're farming, you battle Mother Nature every day because the pests and the diseases and things come along and ravage your crop. So at indoor farming, it's more controlled. So you have more control on it, and you can produce 24/7 with lighting, that is LED lighting. And so this is all really cool. And you stack that up. The other thing that I mentioned already is robotics. I think robotics is going to increase efficiency in crop production. And just IoT, sensor devices that will tell a farmer where he has a problem, and maybe recognition software that would tell him what the problem is. So if you have where and what, then the human being like myself can intervene and help you out with the why and the how to fix it, why it's there, how to fix it. So that's kind of the model that I see in my brain. I'm very optimistic about agriculture's ability to feed the future. I just have no problem. But, again, politics. If we have so many people thinking that agriculture should regress to agriculture of the 30s or the 40s or something into the 1800s, we cannot feed the population of the future with the technology of the past. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, you're just repeating the history that didn't work. I mean, really, with that thinking, right? So division of labor, right? That's how you get productivity. You don't get it by everybody sort of having their little garden and raising all their own food, for example, because you just can't do it.
Today's modern farms, like I'm an agronomist, I still consult with some farms and work in the field. I'm pretty good at plant physiology, soil chemistry, and crop nutrition. But when it comes to crop protection products like fungicides, I need help. Entomology, I need help. Like a farmer who's farming today has any number, the number of decisions are staggering. Everything from grain marketing strategies to technology integration, data management systems, what kind of equipment you buy, how do you shuttle information in and out of the equipment, what's your fuel use efficiency, how do you manage water, what cellular system are you going to use, what kind of weather stations are you going to install, how do you manage futures contracts, how do you manage your people, like finance, risk mitigation. It's like anybody who thinks farming is simple needs to give their head a shake.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming up with those 5 things off the top of your head so quickly. That was really good. You did well. So a crazy idea here, and you tell me how dumb this could be, but do you think, is there a future in indoor high-rise farms for raising cattle in particular? Let's say cattle. So you're close, with it, and it kind of goes to this,
Well, no, I'll cut you off.
Can't happen.
No.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because it's not efficient. What people need to understand is 2/3 of the agricultural land on the planet Earth, 2/3 of it will never grow crops. 2/3 of the agricultural land base grows pastures. And those pastures have grasses that, turn into cellulose and hemicellulose. And cows, sheep are the best things at turning cellulose and hemicellulose into food for human beings. So trying to do that in the city just doesn't make sense to me. And then you'd have the animal rights activists in there, and it just blah, blah, blah. What people need to understand is we have 2/3 of the available agricultural land on the planet Earth that will not grow crops. So if you want to make use of that land, put some livestock on it. Remember, livestock grows and uses old carbon, not new carbon.
All right. Well, Okay, bad idea. I got to go back to the drawing board on that one. I appreciate that. Rob, this has been great. Thank you so much for being on again and for spending the hour talking about sustainability and technology convergence. I love talking about this stuff, and this is such an important issue. It affects every single person in the world, and it's amazing the progress that we've made. And based on what you've shared with us today, I mean, we've probably just scratched the surface on what we will eventually be able to do, not just to keep people fed, but to keep people fed well.
Yeah.
Right. And keep people healthy and while also taking care of the environment and making farming potentially carbon neutral or if your X Prize idea, right? It actually becomes positive. It becomes the biggest positive impact on the world between food and environment.
I think you'd be surprised at what comes out of this X Prize. It'll be interesting. Well, hey, Mike, thank you very much. For the listeners, if they wanted to go to robertsaik.com, SAIK.com, they can see me there. AGvisorPRO, AGvisorPRO. AGvisorPRO is our connectivity platform. You can download it on iOS or Android. My books, The Agriculture Manifesto and Food 5.0, How We Feed the Future, are available on Amazon. And I've got a TEDx talk, Will Agriculture Be Allowed to Feed 9 Billion People? So you can find me a lot of different places.
The TEDx talk is fabulous, by the way. You definitely want to see that. Rob, thanks so much.
Thanks, Mike. We're going to have some fun at the next Abundance 360. I hope to see you there.
In person.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.